Season 1, Episode 30 of the Potomac RPG Podcast. Remember, kids, if you're going into battle, be sure to wear protection.
Welcome one and all to the Potomac RPG Podcast, your source for old news, tired conversation, and mediocre advice for all of your favorite tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host and shield that doubles as a handy umbrella, Adam.
I'm your star-spangled vibranium disc, Matt.
And I'm your Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement Logistics Division, Steve.
All right. Thank you guys for being on the show today. If you had noticed from our intro there, we're going to be a little shield based this week, which should be interesting. You know, sword and board goes back to the very beginnings of TTRPGs. The idea of heading into battle, facing a horde of enemies with only a slab of wood or metal between you and certain death. It's just this classical description of what makes this game so great. But in my view, the shield doesn't really quite get enough love, especially when you look at 5e. No differences in mundane shields. They're all the same. Not really all that many magic ones to choose from either. I'm not sure why shields seem to be an afterthought. Now, Matt, you've had a few characters that have used shields. What's your take on them, especially in their current use within 5e?
Right. So, I mean, I love shields. I mean, my characters I almost always pick a sword and board over, a big two-handed weapon or dual wielding because I like the defense. But I think you're right. I think 5e doesn't really do enough with shields. So, they're pretty boring. It's, plus 2 AC. There's only one kind of shield. And, there is the Shield Master feat, which gives you some pretty good options to do with it.
One measly feat, except for that new UA one that came out. But right. 1 feat for shields. Feat.
And so, I feel that there's really, a lot more you can do with it. And, historically, in real life, right? I mean, shield was, aside from a weapon, was your most important part of your kit. It really wasn't until very organized warfare when you had guys then using specialized things like pikes, that you actually had people abandoning shields. I mean, for most of history, like if you were a rank and file soldier, yeah, you had a shield because it was going to probably save your life more than any, cheap crap armor you had was going to.
Okay, but I mean, isn't really the problem here that 5e just kind of dropped the ball when it comes to equipment? I mean, I'm not the first one to say this.
You have a point. I mean, I think 5e
it's so thin.
Yeah, it is. The 5e is kind of thin on equipment in general. I do agree with you there, but it's not just even the type of equipment. I mean, I think it's also the things you can do with equipment. Like, I mean, yeah, there's an AC increase, but there's no ability to sort of knock an enemy's weapon aside. There's no rules for item breakage, which really would apply to shields. And 3e had a lot, and Pathfinder had a bit more that you could do with shields. They had like teamwork feats and things like that.
Yeah. Sure, but I mean, talking about shields as a subset of equipment. I mean, pretty much every edition. I didn't really play much of 4th, so I can't speak to that. But your equipment didn't really seem to matter that much there, anyways, because you were doing like a super awesome, cool, mystical slash combo rather than attacking someone with your sword. Which is ironically the same problem I had with Diablo 3, but this is a whole other topic, and we won't go down that road. Equipment it's just bland. I mean, it's like, okay, do you want to do a D6 of damage or a D8 of damage? That's like some of the depth of your choice. That there's a little bit of, okay, it's bludgeoning versus piercing versus slashing, but that rarely comes up. There's one or two, there's some UA feats that may come into play when Tasha's comes out that give you a little more to do there. But I mean, that used to be like part of the fun. I think it's noteworthy that this is the first edition of D&D that I've played. And I know that they did this with 4th as well. That hasn't had like an arms and equipment guide of some sort, which feels like it was like a conscious design choice of like, well, we're making less books because the whole problem has been that we over bloat things and people get mad about that and so forth. And it was like a conscious decision to like, we're not going to make an arms and equipment guide, because it's like been a bajillion years now that 5th edition's out, and really we're just on the cusp of getting like this, what is essentially the second major expansion of the rules since the game came out, which is kind of wild when you think about it, how they're slow rolling it. But I just don't think we're ever going to see like an arms and equipment guide. I'd love to see something though that took that place and did, like, I think there's a lot of room to do, item crafting. We've all talked about this, there's classes that do things that seem a lot like they, are related to crafting items, whether it be mundane or magical. I think would be really cool. And that all comes down to how it's done with shields. I mean, when there's only like a dozen weapons and you get like one poor shield, I mean, that's just brutal. What happened to bucklers?
No bucklers.
I want a tower shield. I want to, something. I mean, come on, guys.
I mean, it's definitely the case. And with most RPGs, when they start out, the first type of guides that come out are usually pretty simple, and then as time goes on, then you fill out more of the system, which people will often complain about bloat and power creep and all these other things. But that's just sort of how the market works with RPGs. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of nice. Would be nice to have at least had the field be open for some additional equipment and rules, and shields being a part of that.
Yeah, and if you look at things like video game RPGs and how they kind of influence things, I just remember looking back at like Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and any general video game RPG, it almost seems to be diametrically opposed to TTRPGs in that video game RPGs seem to be very centered on doing as much damage as possible as quickly as possible, whereas in D&D or TTRPGs is kind of like you mentioned the other week, Matt, damage mitigation or avoidance completely seems to be more of a focus. And that's why it kind of surprises me that shields aren't more of a thing within D&D, because of the damage mitigation aspect of this, that the ability to not take damage.
Yeah, I mean, being able to avoid hits has always been, or avoid damage, has always been really more important than just the numbers of damage and healing in D&D in general. And it's surprising because you'd have a lot of options to do that with shields, but it just seems that the what I think is the oversimplification of 5e, I think has hurt that aspect of the game.
Yeah, I mean,
they need to change.
I almost feel like, and I know it's not going to happen in this context of 5e because it would end up, rewriting some core assumptions of the system. But I mean, give me some different shields, and then I don't know, put like some strength requirements on them.
Yeah.
Like let me be rewarded by the fact that in Sarah's short-term game, I'm playing a cleric with a 16 strength.
Well, your character's not going to be using a shield, and it's I guess it's
maybe not.
Maybe
you never know. But yeah. Oh, kind.
Well, for our listeners, Steve's character lost an arm last night, his shield arm, so he can't currently pick one up. But my character is currently using their ability to craft a prosthetic arm for her to use.
He's Ash from Evil Dead.
Yeah, basically that's pretty incredibly cool. But I mean, it just seems like that would be a great way to then give someone who takes strength but doesn't necessarily rely on strength for all of their like attacks and damage. There's some extra advantages that come there. You're a big beefy warrior. Well, guess what? You can actually carry around that lumbering tower shield and drop that down in front of you and protect yourself pretty well versus someone who might be able to handle a buckler, and it's going to give them still some sort of advantage, but a marginal advantage to avoiding damage because it's obviously, you just think it through, it's a lot easier to block someone with a tower shield than it is with a buckler. Come on, D&D, you can do better.
All right, let's get into some questions. We got a special one to lead things off today. A few episodes back, we featured a question from Reddit user WitheringAurora. Well, just so happens Withering was nice enough to respond with a lovely message. And in addition, they asked if we would be willing to review a homebrew class that they've been building. Obviously, we jumped at the chance. So here's what WitheringAurora created. It's called the Bulwark, and it's a shield-centric class kind of reminds me a bit of a mix between like paladin fighter, maybe old school cleric, given the weapon proficiencies, with some sweet abilities to boot. So let's get into it. Matt, let's start with you on this. When reviewing this class, what jumps out to you?
Well, I think for the core class, I think there's two features which really seem kind of I think key themes that I would retain in any kind of revision. I mean, I think the shield bash idea is great. Pathfinder had that. I think one of the things with this class is sort of the scale of the class and the numbers. I mean, it's built more like a 3E or Pathfinder class, and I think to scale it to the bounds of 5E. I mean, I think the shield bash we would probably want to change the damage dice lower down quite a bit. Either something that scales 1d6, 1d8, 1d10, or 1d6, and maybe you can use enhancement bonus on a shield or something like that to kind of keep it more in line with 5E's levels. And the other thing also that I think is kind of a good core ability is, I mean, I wouldn't really add the leap part, but the great stance. I kind of like the idea. Yeah. I don't know if I would do it quite that way of like trading 10 feet of movement for +1 or whatever, but I like the idea of anchoring, of basically, I mean, and they had this for certain, there was, I think, a prestige class in Pathfinder that had a similar type of thing, where basically you can't move, but you get, these defensive bonuses. And I think using that idea, is maybe a couple of, increasing in some way as the class goes on. I think those two mechanics would make really for a good subclass, either for fighter or paladin or even cleric. And I think some of the other, abilities and some of the other subclass, the other versions of the class could be mixed in with that in some way. But I think it needs to be kind of pared down a bit for 5e.
Well, and just to expand on that, just so anyone who's listening, at level 2, there's the survival tactics thing where there's 2 abilities: Run Proud, where you can reduce your AC but gain movement speed, or Stand Firm, where you can use your action to reduce movement speed but increase your AC. And Great Stance was another item that you could do, or action that you could do. That
right. So I would probably fold some of that into the stance.
Yeah, that was sort of one of the things that, reading through, there's like all these really interesting ideas about things that should happen with shields. And some of them I feel like, wow, I wish this was the kind of stuff like anyone with a shield could have some ability to do. And then obviously a class like this that focuses on it would be, even better at that. But it just seemed like there's a lot of things kind of going on and to choose from. And while that can be exciting if you are the one who is really interested in this class, you're either designing it or specifically looking to play it, but when sort of putting it out there and sort of side by side with the various classes that already exist out there, it's like, the class just has a lot of fiddly bits to work through, and there's a lot of decision points, which seems to somewhat cut against the design philosophy of 5e. I don't personally, as a general idea, have that much of an issue with having more choices. I wish, for example, that subclasses were only one of several meaningful choices that classes made through their progression to level 20. But when you have, like, for example, there's this pool of points called strain points that are supposed to sort of represent endurance in battle. And that's an interesting concept, and it gives you the ability to do certain things with your strain points. So you think of it like key. And then some of the subclasses, just like with the monk, will play on additional things that you can do with those strain points. So you have that, but then you also have the survival tactics. And, there's 2 options you get at 2nd level, 2 more you get at 10th level. And you can only, use this feature on a short, once on a short or a long rest. So it just becomes a lot of options all over. And I think it would be better to, Adam, to your point, to, can you take survival tactics type stuff? And if you're going to keep, having points and strain, maybe just put that stuff into the same bucket, cut down
like
on
a monk does.
1 or 2 options. Yeah. And just sort of keep your decision pool to one sort of list rather than, kind of starting to build out multiple lists of things you can do,
Yeah. Well, I mean, to back up a little bit, one of the first things that you get at first level is this bulwark great shield, and we talked about like tower shields in the intro and everything like that. And the special thing about this is instead of the +2 AC, it grants half cover instead. And I'm curious, what do you guys think about that half cover attribute rather than the +2 AC?
Well, I mean, I think it's an equipment-based thing. I mean, I'm not sure what makes it class-specific, right? It's like, well, if someone else picks up the Bulwark Great Shield, do they get the same benefit, or is it only this class? I think the advantage is half cover. I think gives you the AC bonus, and I guess there's also bonus reflex saves.
Yeah, for dex saves.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of nice, but it's not really. Is it really a class feature, or is it an equipment-based?
Yeah, within the stat sheet here, it looks like it's equipment based. It's just that the class starts with it, and it actually talks about how you can spend 1 work week to craft that shield. So my assumption would be that you could create it for any other shield bearers within your party, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
they say the wording is somewhat ambiguous, so I think you could probably end up going either way. But the way I thought about it was sort of like, a pact of the blades, pact weapon. It's sort of a unique item that character uses that you can't necessarily hand it off to someone else and they're going to get the same benefit. Otherwise, it does. I think you should probably just take that out of the class and just make it a new item, because you don't need specific rules inside of a class for how they're going to build just a standard sort of piece of equipment. This read to me like, if you lose your Bulwark Great Shield, it takes you this long to this much money and this long to craft the shield if you need to replace it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
What do you guys see a disadvantage? Like if you had the option of having a Bulwark Great Shield versus a standard shield, is there a reason to go with a standard shield over a Bulwark Great Shield?
Yeah, this one weighs 45 pounds.
Which I think should have, like you mentioned earlier, a strength requirement on this. If it's that weighty of a shield, maybe throw a strength 13 on there.
You try carrying something 45 pounds out ahead of you when you're off.
But let's get real, right? And that's another thing I was thinking about is like, what is actually the size of this thing, and does it fit in a dungeon for example? But think about how very rarely encumbrance comes into play in D&D, right? So like stepping aside from that, I mean, Matt, if you had a choice, regular shield or a Bulwark Great Shield, what shield would you choose?
I'd pick the Great Shield.
Yeah. It depends on are we playing with weight or not, right? I mean,
what game have you ever played in where they play with weight? So take weight aside, and is there any drawback aside from the weight that you wouldn't take a Bulwark Great Shield?
Well, in that case, no. I mean, it's clearly better than a regular.
So to my mind, if you're going to implement the class the way it is, I think the Bulwark Great Shield has to be a thing that is for the Bulwark character. It seems like if you just made that a thing that everyone could have, you just essentially replaced regular shields. Because I got a strange feeling that most games aren't really super focused on encumbrance and equipment weight. Because we've carried around thousands of pieces of gold, and it's like, I don't know.
Hey, I've been really good with Decorius. In our game, he's strength 7, and I've made sure not to go over.
I don't give you anything. That's why I'm like the worst. I don't give anything. I'm like, here you go. Would you like a shield? Enjoy. Speaking of shields. It just makes me think that this should be like a feature of the class, and it's like you created, and your training is such that it's so shield focused that this is like a part of your unique kit. And what that leads me to, the other point that leads me to, is that I'm not sure how I would change it. I like the idea of shield bash. I wish there was more like hitting people in the face with shields. I think that's cool. I once played a 3rd edition character from Recall Correctly that just carried 2 shields and beat the crap out of people with them. It was probably very unrealistic, but a lot of fun to play. But the shield bash attack thing being a bonus action, I just feel like that should be kind of like the main, like actually that's almost like that should become like your attack. Like you're just bashing people with the shield. That's what I was thinking of when I saw what the idea of this class was. So I don't know how I would necessarily change the mechanics to do that. And I know we talked about damage scaling, that sort of thing, but I would be more keen to see this as like the core. I really see this class as like it's the shield fighter. Yeah. And using a shield for a clever defense and that's where, you know, some of the when we look at some of the subclasses in that, it starts adding on a lot of other layers, and you start seeing elements of like kind of paladinish type stuff, and the rest. And I think that the class would be well served by sort of slightly restraining the focus on keeping it more of a martially based character, because I think, you know, when you look at martial characters, you've got like, you know, the first thing that pops in my mind is, well, Eldritch Knight, Steve, that's a fighter that has magic as well. So why not be a shield fighter that has magic as well, for example, right? And I just think that, you know, well, the core thing that you share is they're both fighters, and one's a fighter with some arcane stuff, and this is a fighter with this sort of shield theme. So I think like that's sort of the pivot point. And I don't know, that makes me wonder if it might be better as some kind of subclass. I haven't really thought that through all that much, but like it seems like we're taking a fighter chassis and sort of changing it so that it can be this sort of shield focused stuff. And I just think it might be better to stick in somewhat of the sort of martial category. But I suppose there's
I agree with you on that. I mean, I think this is better suited as a subclass with a couple of abilities that you focus on, you know, in the subclass progression.
Well, speaking of subclasses, just to get into a couple here, one of the ones I really loved was Undying Sentinel, because it reminds me so much of the Ancestral Guardian path for barbarians, where it's all about kind of protecting other people around you. And, you know, in terms of a blow meant for somebody else.
That's the bodyguard theme I hear playing in the background.
Oh yeah. Is that Whitney? Whitney's here. You know,
that's a big get for the show.
Great Defender, yeah, and Personal Protector is great, where you can like occupy the same space temporarily as an ally and take their blows. That's very thematic. I really like that. The downside, you're able to cast Calm Emotions, you know, but which I think is great in terms of this kind of stalwart character who's very grounded. I don't much care for the idea of being able to cast it on yourself when you're feared or charmed. That I think breaks it. But being able to cast that on others, I think that's neat. The Spartan Tower subclass, where it gets that teamwork aspect going.
That was really cool.
For Block the Sun. That was so cool. Where you're able.
That's like the teamwork feat from Pathfinder. Oh, yeah, where everyone who has a shield, who's in with 10 feet or within like adjacent, I think it was, adds their you basically combine the shield bonus for everyone.
Yeah, well, they all get a +1 to their AC that on top of their shield already. That's great. You know, and I see that like if you're wielding a spear for Spartan Tower, you get a D8 instead of a D6. They do have an option in there for the using it two-handed as versatile to go from I think it's D8 to a D10. I'm not sure about that part, because like remember, this is all shield based, so I don't think you need to make adjustments for a two-handed attack with a spear.
Is there any precedent for an ability that changes the damage die on a weapon in 5e, or would this be
Shillelagh? What's a spell?
Versatile.
You know,
just a class feature that just makes it so that you're. Yeah, I mean, this makes me think about going back to like in 3rd edition and stuff like that with weapon specialization.
Yeah,
where you got like you're better at using a certain kind of weapon, and I just feel like, you know, the whole idea of this class being about a shield, then changing that you're better with a spear. Like I get the sort of fantasy that this is fulfilling. You're playing that phalanx warrior, obviously, but you know, I don't think that, you know, you need to change I don't think it should change the damage on the spear. You know, and this is where I'm thinking about like how the class could probably use a little bit of focusing. Like there's so many great ideas here, but you know, I'm not sure why I think the Spartan Ferocity, for example, right, is an ability where you take that. We mentioned the pool of strain points before, which, if I'm remembering correctly, can actually go up and down. Like you can use them, and then there's things that happen that allow you to sort of regain strain points as you're sort of straining through a battle, I guess. But the ability at like 7th, 9th, 11th, 15th, and 17th level, they get access to certain like smite. They call them smite spells. They're not actually all smite spells. There's things like Booming Blade, Green Flame Blade, and that just where it sort of started to lose some of the internal coherency for me. Like, it started feeling like, we've got, we're dipping into like, Gish type stuff. And whereas like the opening with this idea of just like the teamwork focus and that, and like the stuff you can do when fighting with a shield really made a lot of sense to me. And it had such a strong theme to it that I wanted more stuff like that. The spells are cool. Like anybody would be like, yeah, great. I can cast Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade. That's cool. But, I would rather have seen, it being more about that ability. Also, I wonder, I'd love to ask the author, right. And ask them about, what their thoughts about maybe using Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade are less about doing extra damage and more about the way they allow you to sort of punish people for moving on the field, because I'm thinking about this class and I know it's got extra attack. So at level 7, I'm going to give you cantrips that you can cast. If I cast the spell, then I'm not going to get to use my second attack. Right. So is there a benefit that I'm not seeing that makes it at least, it might not be the best way to express the idea if I don't like the feel of like an arcane cantrip in there, but maybe what they're trying to do is use mechanics that are already there to express an idea where you're sort of controlling positioning on the battlefield or something like that, which then maybe that makes it make a little more sense. And I can see some of the connectivity there in the Phalanx idea.
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel this could be a subclass unto itself. I mean, the not even just part of the Aegis, but just like, the shield and spear group type of thing. I kind of feel like that you could even stand on its own as a subclass.
So a subclass.
Well, I wouldn't be it'd be separate subclass. I mean, I think
it's sort of going with the idea of a subclass for the fighter, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that the last thing that we would focus on with strain, we were talking about it a little bit earlier, and the idea, everything else in D&D usually is about spending points, whether it's sorcery points or key or whatever. The points going up and down, and specifically up, basically you're putting your body under more and more strain. I think if you reverse that and maybe go with endurance points that you spend, and then you get down to 0, and if you spend any more, then the exhaustion that they mentioned kind of kicks in. But I think maybe reversing that a little bit might make a little bit more sense with the mechanics of the other classes. What do you guys think about strain?
I think you're right that there, it's a pool of points, just like hit points, just like key, just like sorcery points. It should be better expressed as a pool of points that you start off at a number and it depletes as you do things. And then, if you think that the class needs enough flexibility that it can push beyond what the pool of points are to do something that causes exhaustion, that's an interesting mechanic. There's not a lot of classes that do things with exhaustion. I think like the Path of the Berserker Barbarian, that they allow you to get like an extra attack, and after you rage, you're exhausted. That's not usually held up as a great design for a class. So I'm not sure how good the exhaustion is, because I think, you run into the problem of a player making decisions to do something cool in the moment and then cause themselves exhaustion. And then, it sort of penalizes the rest of the party if they want to, rest or something to get that exhaustion back, and kind of start holding everyone else back by, making themselves suboptimal. But I think it's simpler to have just a pool of points that go down. It runs consistently.
Yeah, it's more consistent.
Every other system.
The rest of the system, yeah.
It's a lot easier to know when you're out than to know what your cap is, since it goes up every.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to add that last round when I did my stand firm, or something like that. It's just like it becomes more difficult to track.
Yeah. So I think in general, WitheringAurora, thank you so much for sending this over to us for us to take a look. I love the theme of this. I love Shield Bash. I love, a lot of these the items that you have in. It seems like most, our biggest kind of constructive criticism here is to kind of pare down and make more efficient and kind of more streamlined with the 5e kind of methodology to get where you want to go. I love the subclasses. They're dripping with theme. Yeah, you got a really good thing going here. Love the shield focus. It's just going to be a matter of paring down. I know this is a work in progress, so and you had mentioned that, but you have a hell of a great start here. Like there's a lot.
Yeah, let us know where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to keep track of this and
watch your career with great interest.
Exactly. If Withering Aurora, if you're if it's okay with them, I'd love to post this in the show notes. That way, anybody else can take a look at this class and see what you think. But Withering Aurora, thank you so much for sending that in. We really appreciate it.
I have news here.
And the sound of Ralphie the News Goblin can mean only one thing. It is time for Potomac RPG News.
My boy Ralphie!
All right, got a couple quick stories for this week. First up, an article by Christian Hoffer over at comicbook.com titled Dungeons & Dragons Kills the Booming Blade / Shadow Blade Combo Attack. So it seems like they nerfed Booming Blade a bit in the latest errata that was released. Matt, your character in Avernus uses Booming Blade a lot. Is this going to impact you at all?
I don't know. That's a question for Steve, who's the DM in that campaign. So let me first comment. I agree with nixing the Booming Blade Shadow Blade combo. So Shadow Blade in and of itself is actually a potentially very powerful type of thing to use if you build a character around it. I haven't, but I have seen quite a few Shadow Blade builds out there, and they are potentially very nasty. And I can see combining that with Booming Blade being overpowering. So I kind of agree with that nix. I understand that that's a good nerf. As for the material component requirement, a silver, a weapon worth 1 silver. That makes zero sense to me. First of all, it doesn't work with it's a cantrip, and cantrips generally don't have material components, and you're meant to use them all the time. Booming Blade's meant to be used all the time, and having a silver tax on it is maybe inconvenient at low levels, but then high levels, all right, it's a silver. So I'm not sure I understand what the logic for requiring a material component for that is, because it's not going to limit the use of it in any meaningful way, except maybe at the first couple of levels, or if you're stranded somewhere where you can't get little silver daggers or something. So that just seemed like, and it's not coherent with how cantrips work. As for the other two nerfs on it, the twin spell I can kind of understand, because you're casting as part of an attack, so I could kind of see how you wouldn't be able to twin it. But then the last one that I'm a little bit, and this is more of just a mechanics issue, is with the reach spell. The reason people use reach on it is because they want to, or extended with spell sniper, is because they want to use it with a spear or a glaive or something. And it really doesn't make much sense. It should just, even the spell's defined as having a 5-foot range. It should have just been the range of the weapon attack. But if it's just 5 feet, then people were using these other workarounds to be able to make it work with a reach weapon. I think it would have been just easier to say, yeah, and it can work with a reach weapon, and you don't need to use these feats, and that's the end of it. So I think that really needed a little bit of change, but definitely the shadow blade combo that I understand.
Yeah. Wow.
So here's what's interesting is there was a tweet about that from Jeremy Crawford, and someone was saying, can I not do Shadow Blade versus with Green Flame Blade, that sort of thing anymore? And Jeremy Crawford said, as a DM, I'd totally let the combo work. Shadow Blade creates a simple melee weapon, and if another rule cares about that weapon's value, I'd pick a value from the list of simple melee weapons in the player's handbook and apply that value ad hoc to the Shadowy Blade.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, Shadow Blade. The thing of Shadow Blade is you can pump it with higher spell slots. I mean, so it's you can actually output a lot of damage with it.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's
that's why it. Yeah.
But Jeremy Crawford fairly authoritative.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
I
right?
guess it's not.
Not
it's
quite
it's
word
one of
of
those
God,
things
but
where
still fairly authoritative.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like it's too finicky of a little bit to actually like spell out in the rules. By the way, you can still use this with Shadowblade, but it seems to suggest that that there wasn't an intention necessarily to nerf the ability to use those things together, which I think is like the one you were most agreeable with, Matt, which makes that whole bit of change interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean that one I can understand just from a balance standpoint, because you could stack a lot of dice of damage with that.
Well, we'll see what happens in the campaign, see if it has any effect on you, but it sounds like it's not going to have too much of
I mean, is
effect
Decorius going to have to start going around with little silver daggers to use his blade?
I just found that consume it, does it? But it doesn't consume it, right?
It's a material component, so it's the silver, so it's like 10 uses for a gold piece or something like that.
Well, usually when they specify a specific requirement like that, it talks about whether or not it's consumed. So I don't think it's going to be consumed when you cast, which is the distinction between that and something like a resurrection type spell requiring a diamond
or something.
X number of GP. That thing's getting consumed. It's a tax on casting the spell. I don't see this as being you certainly couldn't have a tax on casting. It's a cantrip. You're still, to your point, you're still spam them. That's the whole point of cantrips. So I would be very, very, very surprised if there wasn't a rule somewhere that talks about how if it doesn't say it's consumed, it's not consumed.
Yeah.
So then it's a one-time fee and not a tax.
One-time, yeah.
So the ACA stands.
There you go. All right. Well, let's jump into the second article here, which is also from Christian Hoffer over at comicbook.com. This one's titled Dungeons and Dragons Makes Some Big Changes to the Artificer. So there's some minor changes here and there to the Artificer class, but the big one is the ability to create homunculus at level 2 instead of level 6. Now, Steve, I know the Artificer class is pretty new, but what do you think of this change?
So artificers are cool. I mean, I've yet to play one. You've got one going in my game, and I love the sort of the whole vibe that they bring. And I'm really glad to see that in Tasha's they're going to try to take it and sort of de-Eberron the class so that it feels a little more applicable to any random D&D world you create. So these changes, you bring the homunculus down to level 2. It seems like one of those class features that if you're going to use it, you want to get using it pretty early on. It becomes part of the ebb and flow of your character, and it's probably going to be some, for a lot of players, you could see it becoming like this sort of its own little member of the party, like it's a little cutesy pet kind of thing, or maybe not cutesy, but just interesting. And it's sort of really part of your basic character idea. Like if you want to use a homunculus, already you want to use it. You're not, loading up your bonus actions to be used by a bunch of other things. So to my mind, it seems, why not? Just it's just like, getting a familiar at level 1 with a spell. Like, let's just get that going, bring that into the mix and have that be part of the game. So I think this is cool. I think overall the changes, like adding the armor subclass, is super cool. I've expressed in other forums before my desire to play that. There's a kind of an Iron Man vibe going on there if you want. I'll definitely not do the thing where I play Tony Stark in a D&D game because that just sounds obnoxious. But I think there's some good quality of life stuff here. As said in the article, and just makes it a little easier to get off the ground running and sort of feel like you're something other than just a weird wizard.
Well, Matt, how do you feel about
I don't think from a like power level perspective, I don't think bringing the homunculus spell down an infusion down level 2 is going to break anything. It's not like a really powerful thing. I mean, I think it's like, it's an extra insurance thing. It's like, oh, well, it's carrying around a potion and it can revive me when I'm down or something, which is good. But I don't think it's anything that, from a power level perspective is going to change things. And I think it's a similar thing with the Iron Defender. That also can take an action independently. But again, we haven't really at our table played much with pet classes. I mean, Decorius has a familiar that he's actually kind of protective of and doesn't take too many risks with him. But like we haven't really spent a lot of time with characters using these kinds of extensions to them. But I think having the homunculus really is, I think it's like Steve said, getting it off the ground early is good just because it's thematic, and really historically, if you look at the Middle Ages and alchemy, like homunculus was like kind of like a big thing in that, in medieval thought. And I think having that as part of the class from the get-go, I think that adds rather than subtracts from it.
Yeah, it just seems like such a thematic. Like if you're really going to use it, you're like delivering spells and stuff like that with it. Like you want to do that kind of from the get-go. Maybe not level 1.
Wait till level 6.
Exactly, because by level 6, there's all this other stuff going on. People are starting to throw around fireballs, and you're like, "Yeah, but I got a homunculus now. Look at this." Like that's just part of your. And then suddenly they're all of a sudden changing up their entire sort of play style to start taking advantage of this. Now you're sort of like sitting back all the time rather than kind of getting in the mix to deliver spells that otherwise you couldn't deliver. I just think get it in there, get it off and running, and we really should try a few more pet type stuff in our games.
Yeah, we have enough people that we haven't. I think part of the reason is we have enough people that it hasn't been. We don't want to add another, thing to slow it down. It's like I summon Pikachu, and then you got to decide what Pikachu does.
Well,
please don't say Pikachu. I don't want Tom to listen to this episode.
If you're interested, we got the links in the show notes to those 2 articles. So we'll see how the artificer class continues to evolve here in its different iterations. Really excited for Tasha's to come out, but we're going to step out for a quick moment here, but stick around. We'll be right back after the break.
As any tabletop role player would know, coffee is an essential commodity for those 4-hour sessions we all go through. And a great place to get that coffee is foundfamiliar.com. Found Familiar is a couple of people with a passion for coffee creation and D&D, and they've teamed up with favorite artists from all around the world to bring specialty grade coffee that celebrates the creativity sparked by Dungeons & Dragons and other TTRPGs. Use the coupon code Potomac RPG, all one word, at checkout for 10% discount on your purchase. That's at foundfamiliar.com. And with that, let's get back to the show.
How about another question? This post comes from Reddit user The Wombat from Hell, who asks, Shield Master or Intelligence ASI for level 4 Armorer? So the question is +3 to dex saves and bonus action shove is tasty, but I'm not sure it's universal enough to be worth losing attack bonus and spell save. So the feat versus ASI question at level 4. Steve, let's turn to you first on this. Level 4 Armorer, you were just talking about wanting to play an Armorer. What do you take?
So I know that the sort of mechanical thought here is always like, you got to get your stats up to like max and then worry about feats unless it's like super on point for developing your build. But here's the other thing I realized. It's a, +2 to your stat is a +1 to your rolls. I mean, it's a 20-sided die. It's a +1 to that 20-sided die roll. That's cool, but being able to do more stuff always is more interesting to me. Like I like a little more versatility in the things I can do than just being like super awesome good at one thing. Because even if you're super awesome good, you can still, whiff your attack roll or, blast your spell and then, they save or legendary defense on resistance on you or whatever. So to my mind, I think if it's consistent with the idea of the character and what the character's, sort of flow and theme and everything else sort of fits with, I say go for the feat. I love feats. I wish we had more feats.
Yeah.
But I played a lot of 3rd edition. Feats were a big deal. I think feats were one of the most interesting ways to customize a character. I think they went way too far in 3rd edition. Like there were just so many feats and you got like tons of feats all the time. That was probably too much. But when I have the opportunity, I love to take a feat over an ASI unless it's just really suboptimal for my character.
All right. Well, how about you, Matt? What do you think?
I think it really depends on the build. I mean, if you're focusing more on straight up attacks or spells, then from a mechanical standpoint, the ASI makes sense. But on the other hand, if you've built the character more as a melee guy, you've built up your you have a high athletic score, and you want to do that shoving, especially if you have that rogue who's just waiting to get that sneak attack in on the prone opponent, then the Shield Master feat makes more sense. So I think it's kind of a question of, it depends on how the character and party are built, because also it's not as critical to get the intelligence up as it would be if you were a wizard, right? I mean, because you do things other than cast. So I think in that case that, well, maybe the feat could be more useful, but I think it depends on the specifics of the character and party.
Yeah. Well, I'm always one for feats over ASI myself. The only drawback I would say is that the bonus action shove, artificers have a tendency to have a lot of bonus actions to take.
Right?
A lot of the subclasses
Yeah.
are bonus action focused. So the tough part of that is, okay, by doing that shove, now you're not going to be able to, for example, cause your homunculus to take an action or something like that. There's a lot of different things that your bonus actions can do. That said, I'd still go Shield Master myself, just because, like you said, Steve, there's more things to do rather than just a +1 on modifier. And unless you're really power gaming, it's going to be a lot more interesting using a Shield Master, just in my mind.
Well, and even if you're power gaming, like, I don't think it's as clear cut as it would be for a wizard.
Yeah, I agree.
Because Artificer does a lot of different stuff. Yeah,
yep.
So,
well, that's our take on it. So hopefully that helps out a little bit, Wombat. Would love to hear what you ended up going with for your 4th level there, whether you went Shield Master or Intelligence ASI. Now, this episode has been all about shields, whether mundane or magical, but oftentimes the shield does not get as much love as it should in tabletop role-playing games. In D&D, it's always a flat +2, and there are only about 14 or so official magic shields compared to like swords and shit. So let's see if we can come up with some interesting shields for our long-running segment. Let's build something. Welcome to Let's Build Something, where we get to put our creativity to the test and build something live for all the world to hear. In this week's segment, we're going to build ourselves some sweet-ass shields. So in order to make things interesting, we're going to use a website. We've used this before. It's whothefuckismydndcharacter.com. And we've used it for a few other segments. Reason being, we're going to create a shield that's perfectly made for the specific character we roll. So it'll give us a seed to work from. So let's see what we can come up with. Are you guys ready?
Sure.
All right. So
it's tool time, baby.
Yeah, baby. All right. So all of us have the link. We're going to open it up. And then once it's up, we're going to refresh and get our character. So at the count of 3, let's refresh. 1, 2, 3. All right. So let's start with you, Matt. What is your character?
Okay, I am a restless half-elf barbarian from the smallest mountain in the world who really knows how to party.
All right, so start thinking of your custom shield there. Steve, what'd you get?
I'm a gruff dwarf sorcerer from a dilapidated mansion, and I don't know why, but I've got no fucking sense of smell.
Okay, and I am a frank elf ranger from a line of fallen royalty who is posing as someone else. So let's
so you're basically Elf Aragorn?
Yeah, pretty much. So Matt, let's roll back to you here quick. So what are some initial thoughts for a custom shield for your character?
Well, I'm not sure what to do with the smallest mountain in the world, but for the know how to party thing, I was thinking of, if an enemy hits you within the AC of the shield, so 2 or 3 if you have an enhancement bonus, that you could justify that as the shield hit. I would say that the enemy has to make a will save or they start dancing.
Nice. Okay.
Dig it.
All right. I can dig
Dance
that.
party.
Yeah.
It's like a modified version of Tasha's Hideous Laughter. It's like
maybe something like Tasha's Hideous, not as powerful as Otto's Irresistible Dance, but maybe something like Tasha's Hideous.
Does the shield have like a disco ball on the front,
or something like that? Yeah, you can have a disco ball, or when it hits like music starts playing, you know.
It's a rave party.
All right, Steve, how about you? Any initial thoughts on your shield?
The first thing that came to mind, and this is a little ridiculous, is the shield has a giant nose on it, and he uses it to smell. That's one of its core functions.
Sniffing shield.
It's a sniffing shield. Because you just think of all the things that you can't tell what's going on when you're an adventurer if you can't smell anything. So I think that this is something that's critically important to him. And maybe he uses his sorceress abilities to be connected to the shield and sniff through it.
Interesting. Okay. So
by the way, though, I think it moves. It moves a little bit when it's sniffing. Like
the nose moves.
The nose definitely like moves around like someone who's sniffing their nose. He's got to like focus on using it.
Is there some kind of save that the enemy has to do to avoid by being freaked the hell out by this giant?
I don't know. Could you not be freaked out by that?
Does it sneeze or get
could? No, acid splash.
I just picture him. I just picture him sort of sitting there looking around, and someone's chatting at him. Maybe the disco party guys chatting at him. Shut up, I won't loud. I'm trying to smell, and he's got to focus, and then the snow just starts making noise.
Maybe
any of you smell that, lads?
Give advantage on perception rolls right there for smell-based checks, right?
Absolutely.
Oh,
I love it.
Lovely. Well, mine isn't quite as fun as that, but since this is fallen royalty posing as someone else, I would say that the shield has a unique disguise self ability that allows you to replicate the arms of any military faction that you run into. So whether it's the Flaming Fist or Baldur's Gate, Guard, or wherever you're at, it's able to replicate the exact emblem.
So this is kind of like that banner or the sails on the ship we had in your nautical theme game, a little bit like that. Dude, absolutely. I like that a lot. That's really cool. Good. There's so much room for really interesting magical items, and I feel like 5th edition just kind of, here you go. That's why I love like finding like good creators. Like I've got the Griffin Saddlebag is this patron account I have, and I've actually got the first book that he made. It's supposed to be coming really soon, with just all these great and flavorful magic items. I've deployed a few actually in my game, like the caterpillar that Tormund has that repairs things. That's sort of riffed off of an idea in one of his items. There's just so many creative and cool things you can do to like. I always love it when it's like something other than just like it's +3. Yeah. Those are the most boring. I mean, they're useful, like they're helpful. Like I'm not going to turn it down or anything like that. But especially in a game that's longer term, I would love to see something where it's gives me again more interesting things I can do versus just making me even better at the things that I'm already good at. Like I'm a barbarian. I'm already good at hitting you. So mix it up a little bit. When I hit you, something
right.
Cool
I mean,
happens.
In terms of damage, right? You can only kill an enemy so much, right?
And it's only so interesting.
I hit you for more damage, so now you're more dead.
Yeah, and it's like, but I mean, it's also only so interesting, right? Like dealing more damage is only so much. And sure, yeah, you could give my gruff dwarf sorcerer a shield +1, and it's going to be definitely helpful. But like, holy crap, he gets this nose shield, and suddenly I get to role play. As long as I don't get too annoying with it, it adds to the game so much. Whereas the +1 shield just really just gives me a +1. It's like, did an 18 hit? No, I got 19 now. Oh, okay, cool.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I love that we were able to create three pretty cool shields right off the bat, right off the cuff. So we have the disco shield, the sniffing shield, and the shield of what, many arms? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I feel like yours is like the most interesting, and like a probably, like, if someone decided to ask me, hey Steve, can I have a sniffing shield in my game, I'd just be like, are you kidding me right now? Like, don't.
But the shield of many devices, right?
Yeah, the shield of many devices. That's like very thematic, interesting, cool. I mean, I was just trying to play off of a gruff dwarf sorcerer from a dilapidated mansion who has no sense of smell. But that's actually like a really cool, like, that would be a cool magic item to get in the game. Whereas a disco shield, it's like, that's funny the first like 3 or 4 times, and then you're like, hey, my game's not about discos. We move on. Like, but I really want these bell bottom pants. Like, no, dude, there's no, and you stop calling yourself Stu. Stop. You're not. There's no dwarves named Stu. You're not. Oh, disco Stu. Oh, I get it now. Like some bad Simpsons joke. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. It's a great segment of Let's Build Something. We normally would have a third question, but man, we've been talking a long time. This episode has gone on pretty far, so we're going to wrap it up for the week. Remember, if you want to send in your questions or anything you find on the internet, you can send them to questions@potomacrpg.com. Check out our store for merch over at teespring.com/stores/PotomacRPG. If you'd like to support the Potomac RPG podcast, you can find us on coffee.com/PotomacRPG. And lastly, you can follow us at Potomac RPG, all one word, on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for being on today, Matt and Steve. Thank you to the rest of the Potomac RPG crew, and of course, all of our wonderful listeners out there. So, for the Potomac RPG podcast, I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
Till next time, keep those dice rolling, keep those stories coming, and
never stop sniffing! Oh my God, what am I going to do? An AC of 20? I don't know.
We get hit. I've had AC 20 characters here, and we get hit all the time.